Joining me with more analysis on these sanctions, Fox News strategic analyst Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters. Good to have you here, sir. So we've spoken about this before. I mean, China plays a very big role in all of this, doesn't it? And, you know, we need to make sure that China's not doing any business with North Korea. They've promised us they will not. They signed on to the sanctions, but there are still some lingering doubts out there. What will these sanctions mean for China and for other nations that choose to engage in business with North Korea?
Well, I think the fact that only a couple Chinese corporations and entities were named tells us that this is a warning to the other Chinese that are still violating sanctions. But it's not an embarrassing slap to President Xi. It is always useful to go after the third parties, because the sanctions applied directly on a person or a country, that's all well and good. But human beings are ingenious, especially when money's involved, and they will find ways around it. So this going after ships, specific ships, going after shipping companies, going after banks, that's really the next and a very, very important step. And ultimately, while Secretary Tillerson's certainly right that the effects are largely symbolic, in my view, any sanctions, any additional sanctions can only help. And we've always talked about this, Trish. A monetary solution is better than war.
Yeah, I was saying that earlier today. Yeah. You want to, in this case, perhaps lose dollars, not lives. And so we should be willing to make the economic sacrifices. And there are some economic sacrifices that would be made. It would mean all those big corporations here in America that are selling to the Chinese or making products over in China wouldn't be able to do that quite as easily. But, you know, so be it, right?
Yeah, so be it. And also, you know, I think our fears of China are terribly overrated on the financial side. We actually hold most of the high cards on this. But as you know very well, better than I do, international corporations, American-based corporations, are focused on quarterly and annual earnings, and they really aren't thinking strategically. Intellectual property that's being compromised now, proprietary data that they're turning over to the Chinese, it may let them see profits for a few years, but over decades, it's going to bankrupt them. It's going to build China and hurt the United States. So, you know, strategically, I love talking to you because I'm not just a military guy. I know you've got to look at the economic and the human, the social side of all this, and it's very important.
You know, I guess what frustrates me sometimes, Colonel Peters, is that people talk about, okay, well, we need to just show them. We need to, you know, you suddenly are on a path to World War III, and I feel like there's a lot of steps in between now and then that we should be looking at very carefully, and this is a big one. This is a biggie. In other words, us, you know, clamping down on any business we do with China or anyone else that's going to help support that regime in any way, shape, or form. They cannot be our friend. They cannot be our trade partner if they're going to prop up a regime like we see in North Korea. And, you know, the soldiers that would go to war to fight for us, they don't have lobbyists out there working to protect them. Whereas the Walmarts of the world, you know, and other big multinationals that are looking to improve earnings every single quarter, they do. And so that's a very important point. I mean, I guess CEOs in general in the business world, Colonel, they're very short-sighted. They just need to get to the next quarter. They just need to make money that quarter, that year. And they don't think about losing $300 billion in intellectual property every year to China, because it doesn't matter for that quarter.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point. And, you know, we all have to put it in historical perspective. American automakers and other American corporations were working on taking profits and selling things and helping out in Nazi Germany until war actually broke out. So business is always somewhat amoral. But there are times when the government does have to take a stand and business has to fall in the line because, again, a peaceful solution is vastly preferable. I don't think the costs would really be that great to us. China is bluffing, and they're bluffing, and they're bluffing, and there is a finite amount of time.
I apologize for interrupting, but, you know, we're short on time, and a lot of people say, you don't want to annoy your banker. I have a theory on that. I'm curious to hear yours, Colonel Peters. In other words, they're holding so much of our debt.
No, we're holding so many of their bonds. I mean, you know, obviously they own the bonds technically, but, you know, it's
well, they
not
hold
to
our
their
debt,
advantage.
but I think in some ways that's actually kind of good because, you know, we decide whether or not we want to pay it.
Right, and they certainly don't want us to fail and have to default on the debt. But my point I was trying to make is The South Korean intelligence now estimates that North Korea will have a ballistic missile able to reach the United States within a year. So time is finite. North Korea is turbulent. We just saw some really interesting punishments being meted out to high officials. Wang Pyeong-so, some people consider him the #2 in influence in North Korea. He was just called on the carpet. We don't know how he was punished, but something happened. So there's turmoil in North Korea. There's turmoil in the region. We're still finding our way for the administration.
Yeah, and there's
policy.
plenty of blame to go for both parties over the years. Real bad mistakes in the way of foreign policy there with North Korea, because we shouldn't be in this situation that we are in right now.
You know, if I could make one change to our foreign policy that would really help us out, it'd be to have presidents of both parties stop personalizing it. The other guys aren't your friends. Putin's not our friend. Xi's not our friend. Never was, never will be. You've got to think in realpolitik terms. This is where you think in cold-blooded bottom lines.
Colonel Peters, thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you.